Join me in welcoming Vivek Raman, Joseph Lubin, and Robbie Mitchnick.
Everyone.
Good seeing everyone. Hope you're all excited for the president. Before that, we're gonna have a panel on institutional adoption in Ethereum for institutional builders. We have here Joe Lubin and Robbie Mitchnick. If you just want to quickly introduce yourself, and then let's get into some.
I am Joe Lubin. I work at Consensus. We are an Ethereum first pan ecosystem company. We publish MetaMask, which is an interface to as much of Web3 as we can cover, and we build developer tools that also are applicable to different blockchains.
Awesome, Robbie.
And I'm Robbie Mitchnick. I'm the head of digital assets at BlackRock.
Cool. Well, Ethereum from an institutional standpoint is at an inflection point. We want to start with one of the biggest product market fits for Ethereum, which is tokenization. BlackRock, Robbie pioneered BUIDL, just recently crossed $1 billion in AUM, which is congratulations on that. And BlackRock, as culturally, has been saying that all assets should ultimately be tokenized, and you're leading the charge there. Can you talk about the journey for BUIDL and specifically why you started on Ethereum and what your plans are for the future?
Sure. Well, that journey started really back in 2020 when we first started doing work around tokenization, and that, I think, somewhat naturally began in a private blockchain context. I think that was true of just about every TradFi firm as a starting point. We did some interesting work there that I think was very valuable from a learning and capabilities development perspective. But one of the, I think, very clear takeaways from that work was that public blockchains were actually where the future would be in this space. And so we made a pretty decisive pivot at that point to focus our efforts in tokenization around public blockchains. I think that was a fair bit earlier than many of our bank partners, for example, were comfortable doing that.
Definitely.
But I think that decision appears to have been the right one because more and more activity is absolutely congregating, even for traditional financial institutions in the public blockchain space, and not a lot is really happening at scale in a private blockchain context. And so when we developed BUIDL, it was in response to what we felt was a clear need in the market for access to US dollars and US dollar yields in an on-chain format, right? And to have that be interoperable with stablecoins in particular, that's a really compelling value proposition that gets at the heart of what the savings and payments paradigm that exists today in our banking system is, in a potentially very transformative new construct. So BUIDL's been very successful so far. It's been hard work, building this up to the size it is today. $1 billion, as you note, is a great milestone, but it's still very small in the context of our global cash management business, which is around $800 billion.
Yeah.
So we have a long way to go, but we're excited by the progress that we've found.
It's awesome. Joe, you've been in Ethereum since the beginning and co-founded it. Why do you think right now is the moment for institutional adoption for public blockchains versus other times where we had more private blockchain consortia?
Cool. So let me jump into that in one sec. I just wanted to, I think it's valuable to talk about tokenization a bit more. So the value proposition of tokenization is that like standardization, like digitization, it reduces frictions, it increases productivity and velocity in the economy. And Larry Fink has sounded recently like a crypto degen from 10 years ago, where he says tokenize all the things. That used to be a rallying cry for us, and we have this with universal markets, with this universal format of tokens, fungible, non-fungible, different tokens. They can all trade against one another, and so we're going to have liquidity for so many more assets and so much more velocity. Why is this Ethereum's moment? We have been building layer after layer of enabling infrastructure, either at the protocol layer, scalability layers, DeFi layers, identity layers, and we're just about at our broadband moment where Ethereum, and I think of Ethereum now as metropolitan Ethereum. So there's layer 1, and then there's lots of layer 2 and some layer 3 networks that are all connected to one another. We are now scalable enough in terms of our ability to add horizontal scalability and vertical scalability. We're now affordable enough, so block space is cheap, blob space is cheap. Ideally, it will stay cheap for a long time. That won't happen soonish when things get really busy at Ethereum layer 2s, and they're all settling to Ethereum layer 1. Ether will get expensive at that point. Usability is quite good and is going to get amazing over the next 12, 18, 24 months as we add AI to user interfaces and be able to just express our intents and have solver networks take care of what we want done and probably take 2 seconds to get things done. And in the United States of America, it is now safe and explicitly legal to be a blockchain company. So that's great for us because it's been hard for a few years under the previous regime. But it's also really interesting for organizations like BlackRock, for software developers in TradFi or in Web2, because now they can feel comfortable holding tokens, participating in DeFi, or building applications for consumers. We've been building a lot of infrastructure, some great applications for crypto nerds or art nerds, but we really need the big unlocks that will come when Web 2 entrepreneurs and developers come and make use of Web 3 primitives so that they can build applications that are essentially of, by, and for the community rather than building in a more adversarial mode as the legacy economy prefers.
So Ethereum's moment really is now where the Web 2 and TradFi players all converge with the existing infrastructure, and it's incredibly exciting. One other massive milestone for adoption has been the ETH ETFs. Everyone's seen how spectacular the Bitcoin ETFs have been. Robbie, you have the largest Bitcoin ETF and also the largest ETH ETF. Could you give some context as to, on a relative basis and absolute basis, how the ETH ETFs have done and what you expect for the future, including potential for staking?
Yeah, well, I think there's a little bit of a misconception out there that the ETH ETFs have been meh. Yeah. And the truth is that, take ETH, for example, the iShares Ethereum Trust, had $4 billion in inflows in its first 6 months. The number of ETFs historically who have had more than that is a very short list. But when you compare it to IBIT and the Bitcoin ETF complex generally, it doesn't look that amazing. When you compare it to the actual ETF universe, it's actually been incredibly successful. So I know some people have that perception out there, but I can say that from a BlackRock perspective, we think it's been tremendously successful both commercially and the way that these products have functioned, the market quality, liquidity, et cetera. There's obviously a next phase in the potential evolution of this because a ETF, it's turned out, has been a really, really compelling vehicle through which to hold Bitcoin for lots of different investor types. There's no question it's less perfect for ETH today without staking, right? A staking yield is a meaningful part of how you can generate investment return in the space. And all the ETFs, of course, at launch did not have staking. So if that is able to get resolved, it's not a particularly easy problem. It's not as simple as, you know, a new administration just green lighting something and then boom, we're all good, off to the races. There's a lot of fairly complex challenges that have to be figured out. But if that can get figured out, then I think it's going to be sort of a step change upward in terms of what we see the activity around those products is.
So zooming out then, one of Ethereum's greatest strengths is also potentially one of its weaknesses, which it can do a lot of things. It has been a world computer. It's a substrate for the financial system. It's going to integrate with Web 2. How do we simplify this narrative? So a question for both of you is, how would you today describe ETH to your clientele when you're talking about the ETFs or talking about Ethereum's potential? Let's start with Joe.
So it is too big. It's too big to describe. It's like trying to describe the internet protocols and the web protocols. It can do everything just the way you can do pretty much anything on the web. And so there are people who can grok all of that, who can hold a lot of the complexity and the potentiality in mind, but most people are not going to be able to do that. And so we have to focus on applications that a user or a company cares about. And so we are at our broadband moment, and we will see applications like social graphs, decentralized ID, attestations, reputation, things that you can use inside of different applications. We simply have to focus on a little more narrowly and trying to describe the potentiality of Ethereum just leads people to being a little bit overwhelmed.
So if we narrow that scope, then Robbie, how do you describe ETH to the institutional crowd and to the TradFi crowd in terms of use cases or the asset?
Well, it's interesting because I think there's no question today that the investor narrative clarity, particularly for kind of marginal adopting institutions or financial advisors, is a lot clearer for Bitcoin as this digital gold story. But actually, ETH in some ways at the second grade level is easier to define than Bitcoin, but you know, at the 10th grade level is a lot harder, right? Second grade level, it's a technology innovation story. Great. Once you start to get beyond that, it does get a little more vast, a little more complicated. It's about being a bet on blockchain adoption and innovation. That's part of the thesis as we communicate it to clients. And then when they want to get down to a little more tangible level, we can talk about some of the more specific use cases that it unlocks. And obviously there's a lot, but you know, three that we focus on that have a lot of resonance with our client base is it's a bet to some extent on tokenization, on stablecoin adoption, and on decentralized finance. And so that I think resonates, but it does take a fair bit of education. And so we've been on that journey, and it's going to take, I think, more time.
Yeah, so one way that might resonate with people who spend a lot of time on the web is to look historically at where the web came from. The internet protocols were essentially open specifications, open protocols, open source. Web 1 comes along, same thing, open source, open protocols, open specs. And the web was a revelation to people. It felt safe and healthy. The communities were not at each other's throats on the early web. Web 2 comes along, so late 90s essentially, and suddenly there are great financial prizes to be won by companies that are building these social networks. And and then they start adding AI to these social networks, and they start to know us better than we know ourselves, and they figure out ways to run psychological experiments on the population or addict the population to doom scrolling, and adding mobile to the Web 2 protocols and e-commerce, et cetera, turned it all into still an amazing global resource, but something that has increasingly grown toxic and has been destructive of the fabric of society. And so you can think of Ethereum as a major foundational component of Web3, and Web3 is the re-decentralized web. So Web3 is open source, open protocols, open specifications, lots of people, lots of projects collaborating with one another, building things of buy-in for the community rather than in an adversarial perspective.
So one of the best parts about Ethereum is it is a technology platform that will continually evolve to onboard the whole world, from institutions to Web2 players to all consumers. For both of you, what is on your wish list for what Ethereum needs to accomplish to really cross the chasm for full institutional adoption? What are the one or two major things that we need to see to actually unlock full adoption, starting with Joe?
Ethereum version 1 was never meant to be scalable. We understood that we wanted to build this programmable blockchain, smart contracts that anyone could permissionlessly build on and permissionlessly access. Essentially the idea was to re-architect all the systems of the world on sounder foundations, and those sounder foundations were essentially invented by Satoshi in the form of decentralized trust. We built Ethereum version 1, and it kicked off a remarkable amount of activity and innovation, quite a sophisticated proof of concept, essentially. And it has evolved to the point where we needed to add scalability. We needed to try to figure out how to turn this thing into many things, essentially, that all communicate well with one another. So in adding scalability, we had to do a divergent exploration where we tried to build lots of this idea of execution sharding inside the protocol. That was too complicated at the time for the technology to address. And so we threw it out to entrepreneurs and researchers in this divergent phase, and we have achieved horizontal and vertical scalability. And so any new innovation tends to uncover, either create or uncover other weaknesses. And so the weaknesses that we introduced, and we knew we were going to introduce them, was essentially fragmentation of the ecosystem and loss of synchronous composability. And so there are many efforts right now to do two major things. One is reduce fragmentation in the ecosystem, get back to synchronous composability or near synchronous composability. Intent-based architectures and solver networks are helping with that. This idea of taking this zero-knowledge proof technology that we developed and bringing that down into the Ethereum protocol and enabling lots of different Ethereum machines to stay in sync and be essentially native rollups. That's one major set of research initiatives, and the other piece is just related to that, basically to beef up layer 1 because it needs to handle the world's transactions.
A lot of users. Robbie, what's on your wish list for you?
Well, I feel like, you just asked for insights on the game of football, and he's Tom Brady and I'm the ball boy. So I won't try to compete with that answer, but I'll just say maybe very practically from an asset management perspective, one of the things in the roadmap that will help, particularly as we were talking about staking and how you make those work in ETFs, having XQs ultimately come down and be more predictable will really help in that way.
Yeah, so and having institutions like BlackRock serve as a forcing function for our ecosystem, for our technology, for our different research teams is wonderful. So we do a lot of thinking about things that they care about. XQ is one of them. Balances, max effective balances, reducing the number of validators, reducing the number of the amount of bandwidth necessary in these peer-to-peer systems. If we're looking at the ETFs and wanting to add yield, one of the major dangers of staking is that you could be slashed, and that's the way it's supposed to work. But if we can do things to evolve the protocol or just evolve how the ecosystem works, for instance, we have 5 execution clients that all sync to one another according to a specification. If we can make sure that all the activity is very evenly distributed across those 5 clients, then any sort of staking penalty will be much smaller than if there's too much concentration in one of those clients. So.
But Ethereum is responding to demand and institutional adoption, so we appreciate everything from like BlackRock leading the charge on that. Last question, and zooming out, we are in a new paradigm of blockchain adoption. There's a lot of different players out there. There's a lot of competition out there. Ethereum was founded on the basis of decentralization and being a resilient network. I'll zoom out and ask as the final question, does decentralization matter anymore from an institutional standpoint? And what value do they put on a decentralized network? I'll start with Robbie.
Well, I think it does matter. I think some of the negativity around Ethereum in the narrative lately is very overdone. There's a lot to be optimistic about. Joe's obviously characterized that very eloquently. When you look at our experience, take Biddle as an example, there was no question that the blockchain that we would start with our tokenization on would be Ethereum, right? And that's not just a BlackRock thing. That's really anybody who would enter this space. That's the natural default answer, right? That's really important. And you see even today, you know, we're excited about having this be a multi-chain product now. We're seeing assets across all of them, but Ethereum has, you know, a significant majority of the assets still. And so clients clearly are making a choice that they do value the decentralization, they do value the credibility and the security. And that's a great advantage that Ethereum continues to have.
Yeah, so decentralization is the whole point. It's why our industry exists. There will always be well-resourced patient actors that will corrupt, co-opt, censor systems if they're able to. There are famous incidences where the NSA in this country has been part of the cryptography ecosystem and adjust parameters to make it more easy to infiltrate or manipulate systems. The idea of sufficient decentralization is reasonable. So not every network has to be perfectly rigorously decentralized across all relevant dimensions, but some of them do. Bitcoin does, Ethereum does, and we will continuously progress decentralization and guard it.
So I think we're at time, but this is a new era for Ethereum. Very, very thrilled to have Robbie and Joe up here, and we're excited to see all the institutional adoption that's about to happen.
Please welcome Jack O'Halloran.
Hey everybody, how's it going? Pretty exciting day, huh? All right, that was an awesome panel. A lot of talk about adoption. That's what I'm talking about. So quick show of hands, who took an Uber or Lyft here today? Okay, which data center did you use? And how much did it cost you to process that data center transaction? Was it Google Cloud, AWS? No? You know what? That's an invisible experience, an infrastructure experience that you didn't need to know what you're using on the back end. And that's one of the things we've learned in Web 2 is that having invisible, frictionless experiences is how we grow and how we get mass adoption. Okay, so that's what I'm talking about today. I'm talking about invisible blockchains. All right. Here we go. So quick question to ourselves. Are we ahead or behind where we should be as an industry right now? And it's a tough question to ask yourselves, but I think it's healthy to do it. Now, every time the market drops, our kind of normie hater friends, or even people in our different chat groups who get a little pessimistic will say, there's no real use cases for blockchain other than store of value. Speculation's the only use case. No one uses blockchain. It's just 500,000 people trading with each other. I personally think that's garbage, okay? I don't believe it, but my goal, and I think our goal should be to make that not even a topic of conversation, okay? By the way, I'm not talking about how many people have a Coinbase or a Binance account and own crypto assets. I'm talking about what Joe was talking about earlier, real use cases that drive the needle, real use cases of blockchain, global use cases of this technology. And hey, if you took an Uber or Lyft here today, that was a phenomenal use case to leverage cloud computing on the back end, okay? And it was a seamless experience. We need these experiences in Web3 so we can get across the chasm, okay? So this is, a very old chart here. Jeffrey Moore wrote this a long time ago. It's still true, okay? So who's familiar with this, crossing the chasm? Okay, we have some hands. So you have your early adopters are frankly your tech enthusiasts, okay? This is the early market. You then eventually hit this chasm and you have to get through it or you'll fail. But if you get through it, there's a tremendous trajectory because the pragmatists and the conservatives come soon after, the early and the late majority. Now, in order to get there, you also have to have great UX. I worked in mobile back in 2005. We had, it was a good technology. We had 92 of the Fortune 100 using this product. The only highly used product was email because nothing else worked well on mobile. We had all these other business applications. No one used them. Fast forward 3 years later, we have the iPhone. We have high-speed data networks. We've got much more powerful processors in our phones, and mobile takes off massively. It hit that curve for application usage, not just text, email, phone calls, all right? We're at that chasm now, but 16% is the number, all right? This is where real adoption begins. And again, we have surpassed this in a lot of categories. I think, you think about how many people have an account, how many people own Ethereum, how many people own Bitcoin, how many people own these different crypto assets. I think we're safely there. Let's look at gaming. Scale is one of the largest gaming blockchains in the world. We are a mass adoption blockchain. We're built for user experience, okay? Gaming now has over 30 million people a day hitting the blockchain. I think we need to applaud ourselves for this. It used to be thousands a couple years ago. We've been on an exponential curve, but there are 3 billion people that play video games every day. So we're only 1% adoption, not 16%. But the good news is once you're at 1, it's much easier to get to 16. It's much harder to get from 0 to 1 in these spaces. So we need mass adoption. Another positive note, we're getting there on the financial side, really getting there. These are areas that require less clean, simple, easy user experience. Look at stablecoins. There were over $850 billion in stablecoin transfers volume in February. That is massive. And you know what? That is money and value moving almost at the speed of light, not taking a day to process, not taking, this kind of archaic banking system. This is the new future of money rails working. Bitcoin market cap's over 1.65 trillion. This was, when I sent them the slides, it's probably higher right now. But that's a win for store of value. That is a phenomenal store of value, okay? The reality, though, is we need more daily users for these use cases that really, really matter, all right? So then it's all about user experience. So I talked earlier about, I saw, by the way, if you're listening online here, or if you're not looking around, when I said, oh, what data center did you use and how much did it cost for that to process it? Everyone's like, what are you talking about, right? But in the world of blockchain, that's the reality. So Scale actually has taken a novel approach, and we got rid of gas fees all the way down to the core of the chain. And instead, developers pay chain fees, they rent block space. It just opens up this new user experience. It's still economically viable. People are getting paid to run servers. Entities are getting paid to run servers and infrastructure. But this is an example when you combine phenomenal UX addition with high-speed blockchain execution, zero gas fees for the end user, and integrate that with advanced custodial wallets and semi-custodial wallets, and even non-custodial wallets with some very interesting new UX features that are coming. We can let normal people who aren't engineers, who don't have a ledger device, don't really know how to use sophisticated products, interact with blockchain, okay? Another really critical topic, maximal extractable value, MEV, okay? This is where blockchains don't finalize their transactions, and what happens, well, a blockchain submits a transaction, and guess what? Anybody running a node can see that transaction until the transaction finalizes. And then you have front-running, sandwich attacks. Essentially, money and value is being taken from every user and every transaction through bots. Just last week, somebody did a 220K swap on Uniswap, and they ended up with $5,000 after. They swapped USDC to USDT. No, hey, they didn't use the Uniswap UI. If they had, they would have been protected. They used a different system, but the problem is, this is something that we think needs to be fixed. This is the next frontier for Scale also, is going and trying to fix this problem to make sure these things can't happen. We need to have safe waters if we're gonna really hit these adoption numbers that we are going for. We also need to offer fundamentals. The next growth stage is all going to be about giving tangible value to users, okay? Real value. And there's some phenomenal use cases out there. Really excited about them. So just a little proof this works. And I have to say, this is fun for me now. We started Scale over 7 years ago, all right? And the first couple years the network was live, we would count our users, our unique active wallets, users, and transactions in the thousands. We now have over 1 billion transactions. We have over 3.3 million wallets in the last 30 days, over 91 million transactions. So the model's working, and I'm not saying this to, talk just about Scale, but to say, when you really lean into building a positive user experience for consumer-facing applications, you can get dramatic results. But these numbers, frankly, are just a start. We're now in the top 10 of all blockchains and layer 2s in terms of transaction volume, and in terms of unique active wallets. And, but I think I look at this and our, set of competitors and collaborators, and as an industry, we're just getting started. There's a lot coming. Quick shout out to all the builders. There's over 300 applications building on Scale. I get the luxury every day of working with really smart people that understand blockchain, but they also understand how to build applications. And there's some exciting things. There are some exciting things happening. So I just want to say, we are crossing the chasm now, okay? And growth will be led by UX-friendly blockchain adoption. I also want to say, because the President of the United States is speaking here in just a minute, we also have this new government regulation that's it's enabling businesses to come and get in the game. I work with some of the biggest sports leagues in the world, some of the biggest brands in the world, and we got put on pause last year. There wasn't regulatory clarity. This is real. Guess what? They're all back in. 100% of them that stopped because they're like, oh, am I going to be able to do this? So this is going to drive real economic value. And Scale, we are a US project. I'm so happy I can say that now on stage, that we are headquartered in the US. So I think combining all these things together, we're teeing ourselves up as an industry to get to that next level of mass adoption. It's been my pleasure. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Goodbye.
Please welcome to the stage Jason Yanowitz.
How we doing, everyone? Good, good. I'm Jason Yanowitz. I'm one of the co-founders of Blockworks. In about 30 seconds, we have a historic moment. The President of the United States is going to address the Digital Asset Summit. This is the first time in history that a sitting president has addressed a crypto conference. I know everyone has their phones out, but please give a massive round of applause and help me welcome the President of the United States to address Digital Asset Summit.
To everyone at the Blockworks Digital Assets Summit. It's an honor to speak with you about how the United States is going to dominate crypto and the next generation of financial technologies. And it's not going to be easy, but we're way ahead. Just 2 weeks ago, we hosted the first ever White House Digital Asset Summit, bringing together many of the world's top leaders in crypto for a conversation led by our White House AI and crypto czar, David Sachs, who's a fantastic and very brilliant guy. That same week, I signed an order creating the brand new strategic Bitcoin reserve and a U.S. digital asset stockpile, which will allow the federal government to maximize the value of its holdings instead of foolishly selling them for a fraction of their long-term value, which is exactly what Biden did. He got a fraction of their value. We're ending the last administration's regulatory war on crypto and Bitcoin, and that includes stopping the lawless Operation Choke Point 2.0. Operation Choke Point went beyond regulation, and I mean far beyond. It was a form of lawfare through government weaponization. Frankly, it was a disgrace. But as of January 20th, 2025, all of that is over. I've also called on Congress to pass landmark legislation creating simple, common sense rules for stablecoins and market structure. With the right legal framework, institutions large and small will be liberated to invest, innovate, and take part in one of the most exciting technological revolutions in modern history. It's so big, it's, I think, as big as you can get. Pioneers like you will be able to improve our banking and payment system and promote greater privacy, safety, security, and wealth for American consumers and businesses alike. You will unleash an explosion of economic growth, and with the dollar-backed stablecoins, you'll help expand the dominance of the U.S. dollar, and many, many years to come, it'll be at the top, and that's where we want to keep it. We only want to keep it at the top, always. I can already see that the energy and passion of the crypto community is the kind of spirit that built our country, and it is exciting to watch as you invent the future of finance. And right here, it's going to be right here in the USA, the good old USA. Together, we will make America the undisputed Bitcoin superpower and the crypto capital of the world. Thank you. Good luck. God bless America.
Please welcome to the stage Ben Strack and Stacey Warden.
Damn, Ben, can Blockworks pull on the firepower or what?
Yeah, quite a moment.
Seeing President of the United States is unbelievable.
The first sitting president to address a crypto conference. So what a moment. It's a privilege for me to share the stage with Algorand Foundation CEO Stacey Warden.
Almost like the President of the United States.
Exactly.
Almost.
This has become quite a coveted time slot here on this Thursday morning. First, if we could just get a brief introduction, if you could briefly introduce yourself and just kind of share, where you were before jumping into leading the Algorand Foundation.
Yeah, I spent a lot of my career in traditional finance. I was at JP Morgan for 8 years. I worked for Mike Milken for 8 years. I worked in the Treasury Department. I ran the microcap markets to the NASDAQ for a number of years. So I have been in and around traditional finance for my entire career. I got interested in Bitcoin in 2013. I thought it was really a solution I worked a lot in emerging markets in developing countries, so I thought it was a very important solution to some of the issues that they face, and kind of never looked back. And the thing about crypto, it's a one-way street. You get on it, and you keep going further, and you never go back to traditional finance.
Yeah, and we'll get into as many times as we can in the next 18 minutes or so. But first, we just saw President Trump address this conference. Wanted to get your initial thoughts on, those remarks and how you kind of expect this administration could help spur blockchain adoption.
Yeah, well, the main takeaway for me, and I don't know if you caught it because he did mumble the word just a tiny bit, but the Bitcoin algo strategic reserve was very important, I think, thing that he said. They're going to call it the AB reserve, algo and Bitcoin. No, look, he, make Algorand great again. He wears that hat all the time. So, he cares a lot about my blockchain, of course. But he did say, and he always says about making America first, and not just in crypto, but in everything. But it's just after the, as Mark Andreessen said, the foot on your neck, right? Like that we've had for the last 4 years to have, from the very highest levels of government, encouragement and support. And frankly, we don't even need directive support. We just need to, not be hampered, right? Like we have the deepest, most liquid financial markets in the world. If we could just have a level playing field, we can definitely compete globally in the United States. So, of course, I was like the rest of the audience here, very heartened to hear those remarks and how he's prioritizing the sector.
Yeah, and I remember chatting with you 3 years ago when you took over.
That was a long time ago.
Yeah. And now on the inside of this industry, how do you kind of see blockchain tech fitting into TradFi systems, opposing them as we kind of look to build this future-proof financial system?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think in a future-proof financial system they're going to be opposed at all. But when you look at the financial markets, they look like crochet. They're beautiful on one side, very seamless. But if you turn it over, there's all kinds of just nonsense going on in the back office. And, crypto and fintech tries to make that front side even better, but there's still all of this nonsense going on in the back. And crypto is very different than that. It is not a liability-based framework. It is, a bearer-based framework. It is actually digital cash. And a lot falls out of a framework like that can really help traditional financial systems and make them work better. For me, I think there's the big six, which I can just kind of rattle through. First of all, it will help with back office incredibly. If you are just writing to one ledger as opposed to having different kinds of, even internally in one institution, different kinds of balance sheets, talking to each other and constantly reconciling, just have one ledger. You can get rid of intermediaries. I mean, if you look at just the most basic mortgage securitization vehicle, there are so many intermediaries in this. It's basically you set up a vehicle and then you get the mortgage payments, the principal payments, and the interest payments come in, and you have to divvy them out according to your waterfall. But, no offense to the calculation agents in the room, no offense to the paying agents in the room, all of this can be done in code. I mean, it's just really can be done with smart contracts. So, and these just a mortgage securitization vehicle takes, 30 or 40 basis points, right? This is 3 or 4 basis points. This is $30,000 or $40,000 on $1 million loan, right? So just the savings in that can be really profound, I think. And then I think the third thing is composability. Everybody in this audience knows about DeFi composability. We talk about it all the time. But there's other aspects to it which are also quite important, like the ability to just embed finance in anything. A company building on Algorand called Ultrade, you can basically build a DEX. They can white label a DEX for that you can put in whatever platform you have, right? You can think about identity as a composable framework, Ben. Imagine not having to KYC for every single financial, counterpart that you imagine being at a bank and not having to do KYC over and over and over. Imagine banks being able to share KYC framework. Stuff like this is, and then of course, I think this is number 4 on my list. You can, tokenization. We've talked a lot about that in this conference. You can create markets that didn't exist before. You can bring liquidity to markets that that didn't have liquidity before. We have a number of different examples of that, in rental income, for example, where you and I are not going to buy an apartment building to get rental income, but but that's a very good diversified source of investment income. And so now, with a company building on Algorand called Lofty AI, you can, and it happens daily, because this is Web3. You can buy just for $50 a portion of a rental building or a property of some kind, right? Markets that didn't, a company building on Algorand has created a secondary market in airline tickets, for example. Like, you don't have that kind of thing without Web3, right? And then last, Ben, all of this can be yours 24/7, 365 days a year. It doesn't, we think in Web3, we think it's cute that you wait for the opening bell in TradFi, right? Like, all of this, your ability to move money 24/7, it's going to help finance. Like, financial traders, they make sure that they're, so electrons are not disadvantaged. They have cables on the New York Stock Exchange to make sure they're not one is even a tiny little bit further away from the other. But then they take the entire weekend off, and stop at 4 o'clock. It's ridiculous.
Right. And you mentioned tokenization. We've heard a lot of talk at this conference about tokenized real world assets, stable coins. So we'd just love to hear, blockchain adoption is going to come down to utility, and we've seen some gaining steam. These tokenized money market funds. There's one available on Algorand.
Aberdeen money market fund.
Yes, yeah. BlackRock and Franklin Templeton have their versions of it as well. Yeah. So just curious of your thoughts on the utility of those, how you expect those to be used going forward, and kind of how they might interact with stable coins in the future.
Yeah, I will say, and you wrote a very nice article about this just the other day, but I will say that tokenization cannot exist without stable coins. Like, they are one and the same thing. Because if you have tokenized the asset side, but you haven't tokenized the money side, it just doesn't work. You're not going to, the whole thing that Web3 gets you, what we did with Aberdeen is it gets you an atomic swap. So what we did with Aberdeen is we tokenized a money market fund, and then a company named Quantos, who's a MiCA compliant, regulated by the Dutch Central Bank, programmable euro. It's actually not a stable coin, it's a programmable euro, digital euro. What is interesting about this is the fact that you can trade instantly, where clearing is settlement. You can trade instantly a tiny sliver of that Aberdeen money market fund for a digital euro, and you're done. And so if one leg of that trade is missing, you don't have anything, right? So they don't compete so much as they, I think, are essential together to get the real benefit of Web3.
Right. And we've also heard about the debate of what shouldn't be tokenized potentially. So we'd be curious to hear, just from your experience, maybe assets tokenized on Algorand with little volume, and how you kind of expect some of those to evolve over time.
Yeah, well, what I think is super interesting about entrepreneurs is that they always find a way, right? So a company called TravelX tokenizes airline tickets, and the relationship with your airline is terrible. You want to return your ticket back, and you can only fly in the year. You get all kinds of penalties, and so they had this idea. Why don't we create a secondary market in airline tickets you can sell to somebody else? Okay, well, this is and you can, if you're a frequent flyer, you can also, give your lounge pass if you want to this person, right? And so, you can imagine you're going to college and you buy your ticket home for Thanksgiving for 4 years to save money, but you don't actually want to go home 1 year, blah, blah, you can sell it. Well, this market is not going to be very liquid. Like, the number of people that want to buy my exact airline route on my exact day, it's going to be a limited number. This is not a deeply liquid market by any means. But the airlines, I used to always get asked, do the airlines like this or hate this? But it turns out the airlines just love this because they think of it now as a very easy way to take airline tickets back if they want. So your mother lives in Cincinnati and you are like a very good son. You bought a ticket way in advance to go to her birthday in Cincinnati. But, it turns out that your mother decided to go off with her girlfriends and do something like in the Bahamas, and Taylor Swift is doing a concert in Cincinnati that weekend. Well, it benefits everybody. You sell your ticket back because you don't need to go, and then that airline is going to turn around and sell that ticket for 5x because somebody wants to go to that Taylor Swift concert, right? So it's just making these markets a bit more efficient, even though the underlying market is not that. A very interesting project we have going on in Italy with Enel. It's the second It's the second biggest utility in the world, tokenizing solar credits, right? So it's the kind of the same thing. Why can't you get, and this is only enabled again in Web3, why can't you avail yourself of solar credits, right? What if you live in Ireland where it rains all the time? What if you live in an apartment building and you're on the 4th floor and you don't have access to the roof? You can buy an Enel solar panel, and that solar panel can be off in the field, somewhere where it's sunny all the time, and where Enel gets huge economies of scale because it's better to build a lot of solar panels together in one field than it is to put them on like one solar panel on one roof all over. And so, maybe the market for trading solar credits is not going to be that liquid, but it's still critical to have that tokenization because Enel, you can sell back to Enel if you don't use, all of your energy, you can sell back to Enel. It's tokenized, so it's just it's a very efficient way to do things, even when the market's not that liquid.
Yeah, and shout out to my mom in Cincinnati.
Yeah.
So you've told me that the tokenization can be the easy side, the tech side of tokenization can be the easy part. The regulatory hurdles might be the more difficult part for people looking to get into this space. So what might be some of the main hurdles for the players looking to get into tokenization and how they're kind of handling that?
Yeah, I think it comes down to the same things we've talked about for 3 days. So there've been some very good regulatory panels at this conference, I will say. There is this idea of, even though regulatory certainty is getting better everywhere, in the US thanks to the Trump administration, but Europe and the UK and Japan have all made great strides, the UAE. But regulatory harmonization, I don't think we're still there, right? And so these things move so fast that you do need some harmonization globally, and we're working on that. So I think that's quite important. I also think that the good things for consumers about Web3 is just how fast you can move your money, right? But from a regulator's point of view and from a bank, an institutional point of view, the ability that somebody can pull money out very quickly, we saw this with Silicon Valley Bank, right? That's terrifying, and that's also problematic for financial stability, potentially, global macro financial stability. So those are the kinds of things you have to kind of figure out. You got to make sure that your advances over here in crypto don't lead to unintended consequences over here, right? But I do think, though, that we have gotten a little bit of a bad rap from regulation, because the bottom line for me and for people in this audience is that crypto can enforce regulation. Smart contracts can enforce KYC. On Algorand, you turn everybody off. It's at the protocol level. You turn everybody off and you whitelist them one by one by one. It's very easy to do, but you have that kind of granular control. On Algorand, you can embed in the token, because we don't have like a smart contract layer, like a kind of an Ethereum model. It's all assets are in the base layer. You can turn on and off an asset. You can have a clawback feature in the assets. You can kind of whitelist within the asset. Now, before anybody freaks out, once you declare that you can withdraw, that you're not going to be able to claw back the token, you can't change your mind later. But up front, this token might be clawed back, or it might not have the ability to do that. So my point is that Web3 gives you the tools to enforce sensible regulation much more than traditional finance does. So the regulators, I think, should be taking a much more benign view of Web3, and I think they will continue to do that.
Yeah, and so just kind of a follow-up on that, what will it take for more traditional institutions to move on chain? You talk about some of the regulatory things you might be watching. We heard President Trump talk about calling on Congress to pass a stablecoin bill. So how do you think that kind of all works together to boost adoption there?
The bad thing about traditional finance is that they protect turf, like everybody does. The good thing about traditional finance, though, is that they love money.
Yeah.
And so we are going to lead, I think, probably with cost savings and better customer experience, and stablecoin legislation is going to be key to that. So I really hope we can get that done. The problem, though, even for the willing, besides like convincing upper management and all of that kind of stuff that they've been going through, and this point has been made in the past on this conference, but the hard part is kind of almost over now. We're in the hard part now. It will get easier going forward, but the idea, with finance, though, it's very hard. It's so interconnected. It's very hard for one mover to move first. And so we have to reach a tipping point where everybody moves, because they're all these balance sheets, as I said earlier, they're all talking to each other. So I think we're a little bit like in this period now where we all have to kind of move forward together. That's going to be tricky. That's not easy to do.
Yeah, and we have a few minutes left. Would just love to kind of hear your thoughts on, maybe 5-10 years down the road. What sort of world are you envisioning in terms of how blockchain tech, tokenized assets are kind of integrated into everyday life?
Everyday life. Well, I think, first of all, the customer experience will be much more like their traditional finance experience. This, 24-word mnemonic or 12-word mnemonic, and the scariness of you're going to be able to pick to be much more easily in a custodial environment or a much more friendly, Web3 environment, self-custody environment, and we will find things in between. So we're a proud member of the DREC Alliance with Cardano and Hedera and a number of others, where we're it's a little bit not quite custodial, and it's a little bit like not quite your, not your keys, not your coin, but we share keys, and it's a kind of a multi-sig approach. It's pretty interesting. So the industry keeps coming up with these new innovations, but I will say that what I think will happen is that traditional finance, every player will get tired and will no longer tolerate that their money is just sitting there doing nothing. This will not be acceptable anymore. When you hold collateral with your bank, and your bank is, of course, earning money on your collateral, but you're not earning money on your collateral, your initial margin, your variation margin, all of that, putting the ability to embed yield and with quick transferability, that combination is incredibly potent. And so I'll give you just one kind of far out example of that is I will take my Aberdeen money market fund, which is yield bearing, and I will go to your coffee shop and I will buy a cup of coffee with my tiniest sliver of my Aberdeen money market fund, and I will be earning yield until I hand this to you, at which point you will be earning yield on this little tiny piece. So, cash is an asset, apartment building is an asset, they're all assets. This continuum will get just completely blurred and more liquid, I think. That's my futuristic
Yeah, and what might hold that up?
I think what could hold that up again is this. The coffee shop has to be able to take it. I have to be able to give it. There's just a lot of coordination in the beginning for this. But then once you get to this tipping point, then it will be explosive, right? I mean, you and I didn't imagine when we had our first interview that we'd even be here. That we'd even be here right now. Right. And so when we talk again, when I talk after the president again in 3 years from now, we're going to be talking about stuff that we didn't even think we would be talking about here, right? But it just we just have to kind of keep. We do a lot of work on education and a lot of work on global education. We are doing, payments into Afghanistan and now into Syria. And I think that these countries are also going to kind of leapfrog the traditional markets that we know in the West and the United States, because they get it. They understand that with digital payment, they don't have to wait in a super long line to get aid payments, right? They know that they can hold value in the US dollar instead of in their depreciating, highly inflationary currency, right? Aid agencies know that if they don't want payments to go to the Taliban, if they track those payments on chain, they can know that, and they can represent that to their own regulators. All of this, it's going to be a combination, I think, of entrenched players moving forward and the outsiders leapfrogging as well, and that's how we'll get to the promised land.
Yeah, thanks so much, Stacey. Look forward to seeing who your next opening act is. The president today, who knows tomorrow, and we have a great lineup of speakers coming up next. So thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Please give a warm welcome to Michael Saylor.
Well, thank you, Blockworks, for hosting me. And thank you to everybody in the audience today for being here. I appreciate it. I've followed the program for the past few days. It's been extraordinary. And I'm happy to have the opportunity to present in front of you today. I have, could we go back one slide? I have prepared a new presentation. A few years ago, I created one called the 21 Rules of Bitcoin. This one's the 21 Truths of Bitcoin. And preparing for this, I asked myself, what is true today in the year 2025? And perhaps what are the truths that the mainstream world, the mainstream media, traditional investors, politicians, people that are just getting familiar with Bitcoin, with digital assets, what is it they don't know that seems very, very clear to me that I want to share? And so I've gathered my favorite 21 truths of Bitcoin today, and I'm going to start with the first. Bitcoin's an ideology. Freedom versus slavery, innovation versus stagnation, sovereignty versus dependency, property versus poverty. It's a very powerful ideology. It's spreading the entire world, and there would be no Bitcoin without the ideology. It's capitalism versus socialism. It's the individual versus the collective. It pops up throughout human history. We see these themes for the last thousands and thousands of years. You see these themes in the writings of the Austrian economists. You see these themes in the writings of Voltaire and the intellectuals of the 19th, the 18th, the 17th century. You even see these themes in the Constitution of the United States. The founding fathers had this ideology, and you'll see it echoing throughout Bitcoin. The second truth of Bitcoin is protocol. Satoshi created a protocol based on that ideology. The 21 million coins, the block sizes, the 10-minute centers, the SHA-256 hashing. It was an integrated protocol. It's not the only way you could have done it, you know. You could have base 10 math, but you could have base 2 math. You could have English as a protocol, but there's also French as a protocol. Bitcoin's a protocol for prosperity. It's a protocol for economic success, economic empowerment. And that protocol lives on in the software. Oftentimes people say, well, what about this quantum thing, or what about that technology thing? And the point that I make to them is that English language is a protocol. If you have to upgrade the software, you'll probably upgrade the software, keep the language. Base 10 math is a protocol. If you have to upgrade the software, rebuild the computer, you'll probably keep the base 10 math. Bitcoin is a protocol. You may change the hardware, you may change the software, you may change the nodes. The protocol is simple. A bunch of intelligent people everywhere in the world would like to keep their money forever. Once $1 trillion worth of money flows into that network, they'll be looking to figure out how to keep it. And then when it's 10 trillion or 100 trillion or 500 trillion, you'll have a bunch of people speaking a language of economics, a monetary language. That is the Bitcoin protocol. Truth number 3, Bitcoin's an asset. One of those 21 million coins pops out. A lot of people just focus on the asset. They forget the ideology. They don't really notice the protocol. They think, do I have a Bitcoin or not? What kind of asset? It's the apex asset. It's better than cheese. It's better than palladium. It's better than gold. It's better than silver or copper or land or goats or cattle or lumber or pieces of paper that we call currency. Bitcoin is the asset, right? It is the asset based upon the ideology and the protocol that results in the greatest monetary premium in the world. Truth number 4, It's not just an asset. Bitcoin's a network. Bitcoin is not just a network, it's the network. It's the most powerful computer network in the world. It's a global network. Without the network, you can't have the asset. The asset is stored in the network. The network is a manifestation of the protocol. The network creates decentralization, that's true, but it also creates fault tolerance, mission criticality, redundancy, and all of the other technical, economic, and ethical qualities of the asset and of the movement. An ideology that spawned a protocol resulting in an asset that circulates on a network. That would be a simple articulation of what Bitcoin is. It's a truth. I would hazard to guess that the great majority of people watching the price of Bitcoin don't think about all four of those things. And they don't think about this as much as they should. Bitcoin is immaculate. Truth number 5. It was spawned by the Immaculate Conception. A nameless, faceless programmer gave it as a gift to the world. How do you create an immaculate thing? It's a God-given thing. It's a natural thing. We've had it since the beginning of time. No one took beneficial claim to it. No one asserts control over it. No one expects to cash in on it. The Immaculate Conception is an extraordinarily important thing to the network. That, combined with truth number 6, Bitcoin is ethical. What makes something ethical? What makes it ethical is you can take title to it, you own it, no one can debase it, no one can take it from you, no one can corrupt it, no one can control it. It's a thing of natural beauty. No country will ever trust anything that another country can debase or control. No company will ever trust anything another company owns or controls. No person will ever trust anything controlled by another person. In order to reach this great plateau of ethical, it has to be beyond the corrupting influence of any human, any man-made institution, any organization of people in the world. The Immaculate Conception was a necessary condition, but the engineering brilliance of Bitcoin was another condition, right? Bitcoin's it's a perfect machine made of imperfect components. That's the brilliance of the engineering. Can you make something that can a human being make something that other humans can't corrupt? Bitcoin's ethical. Truth number 7, that makes Bitcoin a commodity. What is a commodity? An asset without an issuer. Gold's a commodity. Corn is a commodity. Lumber is a commodity. Why is this important? Because in law, commodities have a special status. A company in the United States can be capitalized on commodities. It cannot be capitalized on securities. There's actually a special carve-out in corporate law for publicly traded companies. But maybe more importantly, I can stand here and I can tell you that I think the price of Bitcoin will go to 13 million over 20 years. I couldn't say that about a security, right? You have legal immunity to actually express your opinion about a commodity. That makes commodities politically superior, legally superior, ethically superior, financially superior to a non-commodity, to a security. And it's not just a little bit better, it's 100 times better, right? And so Bitcoin is a commodity. Bitcoin is actually the commodity. I studied commodities in my early professional years. Every other commodity can be created with technology, with capital, with know-how. If you were going to take your family's life savings and buy a commodity to hold for 100 years, and you thought about it, would you buy soybeans or corn or oil or natural gas or lumber, coal, silver? Well, no, they're all awful, and you know why they're awful, because it's pretty obvious to you that 100 years ago it was harder to make those things than it is today. And if the price of oil goes to $1,000 a barrel, we're going to frack it, triple frack it, hyper frack it, and we'll drive the price of oil down. Same with gold. There's been hyperinflation in gold multiple times. You know, the California 49ers found gold. We created so much gold that we crashed the economy of Europe. Every other commodity is going to actually explode in supply with technology and with price. That makes them all garbage investments for a long-term investor. They're in fact the worst possible investments as a long-term store of value. The king of them, gold, still underperforms the S&P index by a factor of 2 or more. So there's only one commodity in the history of the human race that wasn't a garbage investment. The one commodity is Bitcoin, right? A digital commodity. And let's talk a bit more about that. Why is it not garbage? Why is Bitcoin great? Bitcoin is a digital commodity. Every other commodity I can name is a physical commodity. Physical commodities are God-given, and anyone in the world can create them. Digital commodities were created by the brilliance of human beings in a fluke. You needed to have a brilliant engineer, Satoshi, give away this gift to the world. The world needed to embrace the gift. The protocol needed not to be defective. And after many, many years of not knowing whether it was something or nothing, it spontaneously monetized and came to life. It really is a miracle of the 21st century. Why is a digital commodity important? Well, you can vibrate a digital commodity 60 times a second on a computer. You can move a digital commodity at the speed of light. The AIs can decompose and recompose a digital commodity millions of times an hour, simultaneously moving it and distributing it all around the world at the speed of a computer. Can't do that with palladium. Can't do that with gold. There's no way Apple Computer's ever going to ship an upgrade that has multi-factor authentication on a physical commodity. It needs to be a digital commodity, and that's what makes Bitcoin special. Not only is it a digital commodity, it is the digital commodity. The most profound thing that happened is 2 weeks ago, the president signed into law via the executive order, Strategic Bitcoin Reserve. David Sachs said, Bitcoin is an asset without an issuer, spawned via an immaculate conception. It is decentralized. We recognize it as a store of value. It is our digital gold. You have the most powerful person in the world and members of the cabinet that are saying that it's the policy of the United States government that Bitcoin is the one digital commodity in the world. That's going to ripple. And, you know, I can create a digital commodity, theoretically, an asset without an issue, and I can give it a protocol that inflates it 5% every year. I could create any kind of inflationary monetary protocol. For example, corn and oil are commodities. No one doubts the fact they're commodities, but they're not scarcity. They're not capped. Bitcoin wasn't just a brilliant creation of a digital commodity. Bitcoin was brilliant because Satoshi capped the supply at 21 million. If I give you an inflation rate of 2% in the supply of gold, the economic half-life of your wealth is 36 years. When I give you an inflation rate of 0% in your digital gold, the half-life of your economic wealth is infinite. It is forever. The difference between 2% inflation and 0% inflation is you're dead in 36 years with 2% inflation, and you live forever with 0% inflation. Next time someone tells you that it's just a little bit of inflation and the 2% doesn't matter, I just want you to think about that, the half-life of 36 years versus the half-life of 1 billion years. And of course, with that observation, it stands to reason. The next truth is Bitcoin truly is digital gold. Gold, what does it represent? Gold represents money and wealth in the human race for 10,000 years. It represents prosperity. It represents the king commodity. It represents the most ethical, virtuous, technically sound money. And the vast majority of the people in the world, they're not invested in digital assets. They're not invested in Bitcoin. They don't even know what we're doing here. You're probably, if you lined up 100 people on the street, to say that you're the top 1% is probably an understatement. You're at least ahead of 99%. So for the mainstream, when you say digital gold, what that tells them is that instead of giving away a gold medal at the Olympics, maybe it's time for a Bitcoin medal at the Olympics. What it means is that the golden age will give way to the Bitcoin age. What it means is a city with streets paved in gold maybe should be paved in Bitcoin. What it means is that if something is gold plated, and that's how you monetize anything, a gold plated lighter, a gold plated pen, maybe it should be Bitcoin plated, right? This is a very profound thing, right? The truth, Bitcoin is digital gold. We dismiss it as being kind of a boomery idea, but the boomery idea means Bitcoin's worth more than 20 trillion because that's what the gold is worth. But the truth is everything digital in our modern era is worth 10x the analog version. If Bitcoin is nothing more than digital gold, Bitcoin is worth $200 trillion if it's nothing more than digital gold. But of course it is more than digital gold because truth number 11, Bitcoin is digital money. JP Morgan said gold is money, everything else is credit. Money, a bearer instrument. I give it to you, I don't have it, you have the money. Well, Bitcoin is money. What is everything else circulating in the internet? Credit. What does that mean? It means that I send you something, I send you a fee over a credit card network. 45 days from now, maybe it will be transferred to your account after the credit card company takes 2%, right? In a world of digital credit, that means that it takes 4 years for the money to move 40 times, and at the end of the 4 years, all the money's gone. In a world of digital money, it means you can move the money once a second. Maybe you can move the money 60 times a second. You move the money 60 times a second for a 1/20th of a penny, you still have the money. The computers are not going to think one click, one settlement every 30 days. They're not going to agree to pay 200 basis points per vibration of the money, right? Digital money is profound. It's so profound that everybody in the business of managing money doesn't even understand what this means. When they understand what this means, then the industry is going to 100x. Bitcoin is going to go to the moon. Well, if Bitcoin is digital money, what else is it? Well, truth number 12. Bitcoin is perfect money. Okay. What is perfect money? If you read the writings of the Austrian economists, von Mises and Hayek, they write about money, but they couldn't conceive of perfect money. Voltaire, Aristotle, Plato, they couldn't conceive of perfect money. Why? They didn't have the technology. It's kind of like asking Aristotle, tell me about clean water. How do you understand clean water if you don't have a microscope and you don't understand that there are pathogens in the water? Nobody understood perfect money until Satoshi gave it to us, and that's because it was impossible to create perfect money before modern semiconductors, modern internet, modern cryptography. So they were struggling, and you can see Hayek and von Mises, they struggle with this notion. In the Constitution, the founding fathers, who were pretty intelligent, said the only legal money in this country is going to be gold and silver coin. They kind of knew this idea, a commodity in your hand, a self-custodied commodity bearer instrument felt like good money. What they designated as perfect money in the Constitution, and we have drifted, a little bit away from that, they designated what they saw were the hardest commodities and the most liquid fungible commodities that could be used as a monetary token. And they were never perfect because you can't practically do every transaction by swapping gold and silver coins. And because gold and silver coins aren't hard capped, they have inflation. So they had defective money that was slowly decaying, that was not quite useful. but it was just, they used to say it's the worst possible way to do it, except for every other way, right? And so the significance of this truth, this basically marks the point where economics goes from being a superstition and an art form to being a scientifically based engineering discipline. You can't engineer an economic system or a monetary system before you have perfect money. It's just like trying to do good math, but 2 + 2 = 5 on Tuesday, and it equals 4 on Wednesday. And if you don't have stable numbers, you can't do math. And if you don't have stable money, you can't do economics. If you can't drink water that's not going to kill you, life is pretty ugly, right? This is profound truth. Again, misunderstood. No economist trained in the past 100 years. They never took a course on perfect money. They never imagined it. But you can't really blame them. It's like if you went back to Voltaire and you said, okay, that's the smartest guy in the 18th century in France. And, he wrote shelves of books. But poke him and say, describe, radioactivity to me. And how are we going to build mobile phones and satellite communications? And he would have thought, what are you talking about? Right? It's like the most brilliant person without the instrument, the technology, can't conceive of the rational thing. And that takes us to truth 13. Bitcoin is legitimate. A short phrase, a powerful phrase. It wasn't legitimate 4 months ago. A year ago, if you try to remember where you were and what you were thinking in March of 2020, when the entire crypto industry was under massive onslaught, everybody's getting sued, right? And the most likely future was everything gets ground into the dirt. We have completely come 180 degrees. This is the most powerful person in the world sitting in the most sacred place, the Oval Office, flanked by 2 cabinet members telling you Bitcoin is digital gold, a store of value, a commodity. Not just a commodity. If the US seized 10,000 securities, all your artwork, all your houses, your planes, your trains, your automobiles, every currency, everything of value, your diamonds, your gold brooches, your silver, they'd sell it. Right? The only thing the United States does not sell is its national parks, its nuclear stockpiles, and its Bitcoin. Now, that's a shockwave that will be heard around the world. That just happened, literally days ago. It's going to take a while for that to ripple through the entire federal government. Then it will ripple through the state governments. Then it will ripple through the banking system, the insurance system, the credit rating agencies. Then it will ripple to all the banks in Mexico and El Salvador and Argentina and then Europe. It's rippling through the banks in Hong Kong and China and Japan and Abu Dhabi and Europe. How long will it take? Well, how long does it take for a profound good idea to move its way through layers and layers of bureaucracy? It'll take a while, but the innovators will actually grab this, and those that need the money, that want the money, will reach for and embrace the money, and they will be enriched by it, and there will be others that will resist it. But that entire shockwave, right, that explosion in legitimacy, that happened just a few weeks ago, happened on a Thursday night in the White House. And that's profound. We are legitimate. And as I've said before, if Bitcoin's not going to 0, it's going to 1 million, right? It's either nothing or it's something. And if it's something, then it's going up. And truth 14, Bitcoin is corporate. I talked a little about corporate law. I'm very sensitive to it because I ran a public company for many years. We came public in '98. Every public company in the world is capitalized on one of two things. You're either going to capitalize on short-dated treasuries or sovereign debt, in essence, currency, or you're going to capitalize on a commodity. Well, it turns out that every commodity other than Bitcoin underperforms the S&P index. It doesn't beat the cost of capital. So capitalizing upon silver or gold or palladium or oil makes no sense. There is one commodity that you can put 100% of a corporate balance sheet in. And that one commodity is a digital commodity, and that digital commodity is called Bitcoin. And so what does it mean? It means that for the first time in 100 years, companies can recapitalize, and they are recapitalizing. And what does that mean? That means a company starts by sweeping a little bit of excess cash, and then cash flows, and then it sells some equity, and then it issues some debt, and then another company follows, and another company follows. Right now, there's about 80 companies that are starting to buy Bitcoin, and there's probably 80 ETFs. We're going to see another one every week and another one every week, and pretty soon there'll be hundreds. And those hundreds become the gateways for hundreds of trillions of dollars of equity capital and fixed income capital to migrate into the entire digital assets economy. And you can see it right in front of your face. You see a company like MetaPlanet goes from one hotel being worth a few $1 million to being worth $1 billion in 12 months. Where does it stop? It's not going to stop, right? If you're legitimate, you're corporate, right? You're going to see a transformation of mainstream organizations. The 15th truth, Bitcoin is global. Everywhere in the world I go, I meet someone and they say, well, thanks, thanks because I bought a Bitcoin for my daughter, or I bought a Bitcoin for the family. We appreciate what you're doing. And you know what I say? I say thank you because I appreciate what you're doing. Bitcoin is global, Your Apple stock isn't, your land isn't, right? The artwork that you hold isn't global, right? Bitcoin is a global asset. It means somebody in Nigeria buys it and they're getting the benefit of entrepreneurs in Manhattan. And it means someone in Arkansas buys it, and they're actually in an economic relationship with somebody in Singapore, right? This is not a lowest common denominator thing. You own Arkansas real estate, no one's going to fish you out of that investment. You own Bitcoin, you bury it in your backyard in Arkansas, and you'll wake up in 30 years and find out that someone in Tokyo or London made you rich, right? This is the global asset. There isn't another asset that trades on Wall Street that is global in the way that Bitcoin is. And it's not just global, it's immortal. We're stretching in time and space. Show me an asset that stretches to every part of space that truly is global, Bitcoin. Now show me one that I can see into the next 100 years or 1,000 years. There's nothing else that you own that's going to last 100 years, right? Your warehouse will have to be redone. Your artwork will probably have to be restored, right? What company would you think is going to be around 200 years from now, right? The real beauty of Bitcoin is the elegance of the protocol is all you're doing is buying 1/21 millionth of all the money in the world forever, okay? When is that going to obsolesce? Like when are you not going to want to own 1/21 millionth of all the money in the world forever, right? It's not like iPhone 99. It's not like, getting the next upgrade on the whatever gadget, right? Bitcoin is immortal because the idea is so timeless and so elegant, and the network is just virally going to spread. It's a life form. And if it's immortal, it means you can actually think 200 years in advance. No company expects to live more than 10, 20, 30 years. Everybody's short term. It takes me to truth number 17 is digital energy. A calorie is organic energy. A Satoshi is digital energy. If you want the AI, if you want to put life in cyberspace, if you want to bring an AI to life, you have to imbue it with digital energy. Then it comes to life. Then it thinks. Then it lives. Then it procreates. Maybe it lives forever. You can't. Anything that is funded with digital credit is just a shadow. It's a shade. It's a ghost. If you want something to be a true life form, you have to put real energy into it. I've said many times before, Bitcoin is a conservative asset. I give it to you. I don't have it. It implements conservation of energy in cyberspace, but the more important point is it's going to bring life to cyberspace. Truth 18, if it's digital energy, then Bitcoin's a digital energy network. How do you move energy from point A to point B? How do you vibrate energy, right? How do you do it in a rapid, at the speed of a computer rate? How do you bring the entire world into that relationship? You can't do it with a credit IOU, and certainly you're not shipping gold from New York to Tokyo in a second. Which takes us to truth number 19. If it's an energy network, Bitcoin is a digital economic system. How do you post $10 million for 5 minutes, with a company across the country and fetch it back? How do, vibration, how do I give it to someone, take it back in 18 seconds? How do I swap a capital asset for a currency asset? We see this in DeFi, right? I'm swapping Bitcoin for stable coin for Bitcoin, but think more broadly, right? Think about a world of 1 billion robots talking to 1 billion AIs that are thinking at the speed of the computer, that want to actually transact millions and millions of times an hour in time and space. They're going to do it with a digital energy network. And that takes us to truth 20. If it's an energy network, I can reverse it. Bitcoin becomes a digital defense system. Bitcoin is the most powerful network. What's the unit of power? The exahash. If I actually place my cryptographic keys, my identity, my authentication behind that hash wall, behind that wall of digital energy, then I can secure a system, authenticate a system, defend a system, potentially even attack a system. You can't be a superpower if you lose control of your airspace. You can't be a superpower if you lose control of outer space. You can't be a superpower if you lose control of cyberspace. Control of the digital power network, the mining network, the hash network is control of the ability to move energy and capital from point A to point B. Control the network, control your destiny. Lose control of the network, you lose the ability to engage in digital commerce. Maybe you lose the ability to secure your cyber systems. It's a defense system. And with that, I'll end with my final truth, truth 21. Bitcoin is an emerging solar system. Everybody says it's a network, and then they go, yeah, I read something about Metcalfe's law. And Metcalfe's law is like knowing enough to hurt yourself. It's not a Metcalfean network. It's a Newtonian network. Bitcoin is an evolving network. Think a star system forming. There is matter, there is energy. It's the brightest thing in the financial universe. It's got a magnetic field. It is slurping energy, capital, into the magnetic field. There are objects in orbit. They're falling into orbit around it. All of you are in orbit around it to a certain extent. Every company, every country, every actor. It is getting more powerful. It will continue to get more powerful. It will continue to get brighter, right? A Metcalfean idea is like a little asteroid went past on the left and a white dwarf went past on the right, and they're both equal. Well, they're not equal. The white dwarf is going to suck the atmosphere off my planet, and the little asteroid is irrelevant. It's like a cute little shooting star. It made a little spark for me, right? This is not a little Metcalfean network. This is a network where when someone brings $1 billion to the network, it matters. When they bring 10 billion, it matters more. When they bring 100 billion, it matters more. The more capital, the more energy that flows in the network, the more powerful, the greater the gravitational field. Eventually, anyone in the orbit, right, has to adjust their trajectory in order to accommodate that gravitational field. You see this thing coming to life in front of you. It's going to have Newtonian dynamics, and it is an energy system emerging. And these are the 21 truths. Thank you for your time. And please go tell someone the truth about Bitcoin.
To join Michael Saylor in conversation, please welcome Pete Rizzo.
Michael?
Everybody, welcome, or I guess welcome to me. You've been here. Michael, thanks for the presentation. Pete Rizzo, Bitcoin historian on X, host of the Supply Shock Bitcoin podcast for Blockworks. Michael, just want to jump in where you were in your presentation talking about we are watching history. This is a historic moment. The world is changing. We just saw a sitting president make an address at a Bitcoin conference, something that would have been unheard of even a few years ago. And today on the news, we have the Swiss National Bank making a statement about them not wanting to buy Bitcoin. We have Pakistan coming out forming a crypto council saying they'll be the leaders of Asia. So Michael, over to you. What is the risk here for nations that not just adopting a policy, that don't actually buy Bitcoin, don't start treating this asset as the commodity, the digital commodity?
Well, I'm an aeronautical engineer, and we design airplanes. And if you create a supersonic airplane, you create a shock wave. Supersonic means the plane is moving faster than the rate at which the air can communicate or get out of the way. So when something is moving too fast, you have turbulence, you have shock wave, you will have a lot of noise. What you're seeing here is the Bitcoin shock wave. This is going so fast. Every actor, every money manager, every central bank, every politician is going to be asked the question, why don't you own Bitcoin? And that is indicative of just how much power they have. They're not being asked whether or not they're going to put cobalt in the Swiss national reserves. But I think everybody with a pool of capital is going to be asked by activists in their own country, by activists in their own company, by their shareholders, why aren't you buying Bitcoin? And what you'll see is the world will bifurcate, right? You had an extraordinary, innovative moment in the White House a few weeks ago, where what you saw was the president saying, we're going to embrace the future. And the president puts his finger on the world's first digital commodity and identifies it and says, this is not a bad thing, this is a good thing. We're going to own it. We're not going to sell it. We're going to get as much of it as we can get, right? That's a progressive move forward. I think you'll see that. You'll see other countries that will be regressive. I'm afraid of it. Why are you bothering me? You know, it's a nuisance. But at the end of the day, right, this is no different than embracing, you know, nuclear weapons or explosives or ships or airplanes, right? The powerful and the wealthy and the prosperous will embrace the new technology and overcome their fears. And the regressive will resist it, they'll fall behind, and they'll be impoverished by their lack of vision.
Well, let's talk about the how, right? So the strategic Bitcoin reserve is here. The talk now is about how the government would acquire Bitcoin in the United States and some of these other jurisdictions. What advice are you giving to governments out there that want to move fast, that don't want to be impoverished, don't want to have their citizens be left behind? How do they acquire?
Well, I think the first thing to do, which is what our government is doing, is build consensus and awareness. It's really important, right, first to identify Bitcoin's a commodity. It's very important to emphasize it's got an immaculate conception. There's no issuer. It's very important to make sure people understand it's digital gold. It's pretty important to understand it's an asset that will enrich us. If you don't get that consensus from the citizens, the taxpayers, and a bipartisan consensus, it's hard to move forward. And I think that they're doing that. So what's going to happen right now is, I think, a very elaborate and very thoughtful political process to build consensus. And consensus building is educating. We see that going on in DC. It's not going to be, I wouldn't be in favor of like one jolt, you know, trying to do everything at the same time, because there's that phrase, you know, if you want to go fast, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together, right? And what we need to do is make sure that we take everybody along, and that's going to be a dialogue between the White House, the Cabinet, Treasury, Commerce, the Senate, the House, the industry, and then all of the major political constituencies on both sides of the aisle.
Well, one of the big questions right now is really how much Bitcoin does America have? Senator Cynthia Lummis coming out and talking about this. We think the United States has 200,000 Bitcoin, but we don't know. There hasn't been an audit. We know that some of these agencies have been conducting sales as they have been historically. What is the impact here if the United States has less Bitcoin than we think we have? What if we don't have 200,000 Bitcoin?
Well, I mean, the only thing we know is we don't have enough, whatever the number is. I think that we'll know more with more transparency and time, especially this year. I think that we'll put in place pretty good programs for managing digital assets, for managing Bitcoin. Certainly, I think by the end of the year, based upon everything that the president has said. I think that clearly the opportunity is that there's $450 trillion of long-term capital in the world, and it's all invested in 20th century bonds, 20th century real estate, 20th century equity, and 20th century artwork and other collectibles. And as the world gets educated, they're going to sell their inferior assets and they're going to convert them into Bitcoin. And the Bitcoin network is going to grow from 2 trillion to 20 trillion to 200 trillion, and then it's going to grow beyond. So the opportunity is buy cyberspace, buy Bitcoin, buy a share of the digital capital of the world, and then let all of the capital from the rest of the world flow into the network and enrich you. Capital from the 20th century in the US. I mean, someone with a warehouse in New Jersey, when it gets to the end of its life, may very well say, instead of renovating the warehouse for another 20 years, I think I'll sell it and buy Bitcoin with it. So 20th century capital will flow into the Bitcoin network, foreign capital will flow in the Bitcoin network, and then these AIs and technology companies are going to create tens and then hundreds of trillions of dollars of value. It will flow into the Bitcoin network. So the opportunity is simply buy it, buy as much of it as you want to own, and then allow the passage of time to enrich you. And then I think the threat is, right, the risk is, don't buy it. How would you feel if your enemy made $80 trillion and owned the network or control the network? The worst case would be they make 80 or 100 trillion, they control the network, they own cyberspace, you don't. And I would say the best analogy, and this is manifest destiny in the United States. When Thomas Jefferson was president, he had an opportunity to buy Louisiana. We didn't have the money, but it's not that complicated. You're on the East Coast and you look west and you think, do I want to allow the French, or do I want the French to sell this to the British? Or do I want it to be sold to the Spaniards? Or do I want to own it? So we bought it. And then we moved on to take control of and take ownership of Texas, and then the West, and then California. And, where would the country be if California was owned by the Spanish and a third of the country was owned by the French, and we had been responsible in not taking risk? And so the answer is, it's the future, right? You may not, you could say, well, I live in New York City. I don't think anybody will ever want to live in St. Louis or San Francisco or LA. It's like a hard wagon ride from here. And you would be right, but you would be wrong. Of course they want to live in San Francisco and LA. You just got to look out far enough. And I would say, I think people in this room know this, but the average of the normie would say, well, wait, I can't live in cyberspace. I can't live in a digital energy network. It's like, well, maybe you can, but the AI can. The thing that you create that's going to take responsibility for all your family's money, that's going to make you rich, it will live in cyberspace. It will look at you and say, are you crazy? I can do things 1,000,000 times a second perfectly, 1,000,000 times more efficiently there. But you want me to actually, trade copper tokens, at the speed of sound or something, or less than the speed of sound. So the future is there. The economy is going to go there. You can buy it. You can buy it for a nickel. You know, we bought 80% of the United States for $40 million, 80% of the country. And I think there's an equivalent opportunity right now with Bitcoin. So it's something you do it either because it's a good opportunity, or you do it because you wouldn't want your worst enemy to do it to you.
Right. Well, you put a number on the goal you have for the United States. You'd like to see the United States own 5 million Bitcoin, about 25% of the network. Do you have a sense then of how much of the Bitcoin supply could be owned by governments? If like there's a geopolitical order that comes around Bitcoin, how much of the supply would be owned by just the totality of governments?
Look, I think Bitcoin is perfect money, and it's the most profound opportunity of the 21st century. And the rich, the powerful, the comfortable, and the arrogant have no need for it. So I think the most beautiful thing about Bitcoin is it's money there for the taking. If you want money, if you need money, if you're willing to take the risk, if you're at the beginning of your life cycle, if you're in your youth, America was a youthful country. If you're a youthful person, a youthful family, a youthful company, if you're an ambitious country, then it's there for the taking. I can't really tell you, I mean, and the beauty is Satoshi gave sovereign money, which means that the rights of a cab driver in Nigeria are just as powerful as the rights of the United States, you know, in Foggy Bottom. So will the Bitcoin be claimed by individuals? Will it be claimed by corporations? Will it be claimed by nation states? Will it be claimed by institutions? And the answer is, I don't know. And I think that Satoshi just kind of gave perfect money to the world. Those who can overcome their arrogance, who need it, will see it for what it is, and they will claim it. And then others will be comfortable in their 20th century existence, and they will dismiss it as a nuisance. And, you know, I've said sometime before, the volatility of Bitcoin is a gift to the faithful. The complexity of Bitcoin is a gift to the faithful. Because if it was simple and if it was non-volatile, someone with more money than you, that's arrogant, that doesn't need the money, would have it all, and you would have none of it. You would have no opportunity. So I think it's in everybody's best interest that it remain a little bit complicated, a little bit volatile, and then the greatest nations of the 22nd century will embrace it. I mean, there was a time when the Chinese outlawed explosives and gunpowder, and the Japanese thought that was a good idea too. Right, and it lasted for a while until people that thought that explosives and guns and gunpowder and technology were an okay idea showed up and made them change that. They toppled the governments, and they were dragged kicking and screaming into the 20th century.
But I guess, is there a number that, you know, scares you or might worry people? Because there are people who are worried about how much government involvement there is now in Bitcoin. So is there a number that change? There is no number, it sounds like. It changes how you think about Bitcoin in terms of how much governments could acquire, with, you know, China now looking maybe to respond to the U.S.
I put my trust in Bitcoin. I think that Bitcoin is going to evolve in a very dynamic, very healthy fashion, because it's the most ethical, the most open, the most ethically sound, the most powerful idea in the world. There's going to be nation-state struggles, but it's possible all nation-states ignore it, and it's companies that fight over it. It's possible that companies ignore it, and it's the individuals that fight over it. But I think I mean, I talked about ideology, right? Bitcoin is the triumph of the natural law over the artificial law. It's a triumph of the natural versus the artificial. Right? And natural law says what naturally should happen will happen. And those that are arrogant and foolish will dismiss it, and they won't benefit from it. And I think that, as, you know, the question is, am I worried that the U.S. won't embrace it? Or am I more worried they will embrace it? The truth is, if the U.S. embraces it, it will inject virtue and natural law, you know, and respect for property rights and freedom and economic balance into the U.S. government. So I think I think any organization that embraces Bitcoin is made more virtuous, made healthier, and made more rational. And I think in that way, I don't really worry about, it's like with banks, right? Am I worried about banks embracing Bitcoin? No, the banks would be more rational, and they would be more equitable, and they would be more ethical, and they would be more secure and probably better actors if they embrace Bitcoin.
Well, certainly there's a lot of organizations here. I want to call back a few of your recent statements and just talk to the startups and kind of innovators who are in the audience about what opportunities you see. Obviously, you delineate between Bitcoin and the crypto ecosystem beautifully, but recently you've said that you see digital currency as being a $10 trillion opportunity, digital securities as a $10 to $20 trillion opportunity, and then digital tokens as a $10 trillion opportunity just for America. In the past, you've maybe been more critical of these projects. Can you talk about what opportunity that is? What is that opportunity, and are you interested in it?
Yeah, I posted this on my X profile on highlights under a digital asset strategy, which I presented to the president in the White House a few weeks ago. I think that the great opportunity here is to define an asset class, the digital token. And I think the digital token ought to be an asset with an issuer that has some utility that stops short of being a security. And if that's the case, why can't 40 million businesses issue a token with some utility to create capital? I think digital tokens for capital creation and for innovation. And as long as you're civilly and criminally responsible for the damage you do, as long as you don't lie, cheat, and steal, I think that there ought to be a massive token economy that explodes. And that'll get us to 10, 20, 30, 50 million tokens, and many will fail, but some will succeed, and then the world will get very interesting. I think that the brutal fights over the last 4 years were because we only had securities and commodities. I think that that's a false dichotomy, and there will always be confusion and controversy until we create a new set of assets. The digital token ought to not be a security and not be a commodity. It ought to be an asset with an issuer. And if the issuer takes responsibility for creating utility and for not lying and cheating and stealing, then you've unleashed the opportunity for 400 million businesses to raise capital and innovate. I think digital currencies ought to be designated as such, which is an asset with an issuer backed by currency. And I think that should be a competitive market. And I think that if digital currencies become competitive, I think things like the dollar will spread to be a $10 trillion asset, right? It's right now, Tether is successful offering zero yield, and there's 150 billion of demand for it without being, endorsed legitimately by the U.S. government. If the U.S. government let a bank offer you a digital currency that gave you 400 basis points of yield, the demand would go up by a factor of 100, right? And the big winners would be the U.S. dollar and the issuers, and then most of the weak currencies will be replaced, and the U.S. will export its currency to the world. And I think the U.S. can export $10 trillion of U.S. dollars, but it has to take the AML KYC friction off, right? It needs to be a digital currency that we can trust, that moves at the speed of light and vibrates 1 million times a second and goes through 100,000 layers in an hour. That's what's best for the U.S. dollar, and that's what's best for the economy. And if you take that same idea to securities, why can't you tokenize Apple stock or a share of ETF? And if you do that, we will export trillions of dollars of our securities to the world, and then people will start to create intricate instruments to tie currencies with securities, with commodities, with tokens, and then you'll see $100 trillion of value created through innovation.
Well, winding down here, talking again about this currency, securities, tokens aspect of your framework, are these opportunities for strategy? Who are these opportunities for, and then who can gain from these opportunities in your view?
I think there's 400 million companies that would like to raise capital. I think the token is an opportunity for any company that ever wants to raise capital or create something new and innovative in cyberspace. I think that the digital currency opportunity is going to be for regulated banks and big corporations that are, that can file audited statements and get the trust of the financial regulators. I think digital securities, I mean, any company that could issue a security might get into that space, but it's like for the ETF providers and companies that are regulated entities. So what I see is Bitcoin as the king commodity. I see 100 digital currencies. I see thousands or tens of thousands of digital securities. And I see millions and millions of tokens circulating, all of them on 24/7, 365 crypto exchanges. And all we're waiting for that digital assets framework to be written into law by the President of the United States. When that happens, there's a Cambrian explosion of all these assets, and it'll start in the US. It will ripple out to every other country in the world. Everybody will copy the US. And if the US does it right, then all the entrepreneurs and all the capital will come to the US. And of course, that's the vision of the Trump administration and this industry.
Final question, Michael. You talked about the 21 truths. Are there still things that you're learning about Bitcoin yourself personally?
Every single day, I'm learning something new and elegant and beautiful and wonderful about Bitcoin. I think we'll never completely understand it, and it's like the mysteries of the universe unraveling themselves to an astrophysicist. It's a lovely endeavor.
Michael Saylor, Executive Chairman of Strategy. Thank you all for watching.
Let's give a warm welcome to David Rodriguez and Solomon Tesfaye.
Give it a minute. All right, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Dave Rodriguez. I'm the head of Blockworks Advisory, and I'm joined here today by Solomon Tesfaye, who's the head of capital markets at Aptos Labs. Thanks for joining. Pleasure to be here. Before we jump to the list of questions, talk about how tokenization unlocks new use cases for real world assets. We'd love to dive into your background at Aptos Labs, and even further. You've been doing this in this industry for a minute, so I'd love to hear more about your prior background.
Absolutely. First of all, thanks for joining. A tough act to follow. So as David mentioned, Solomon Tesfaye, I'm the head of capital markets at Aptos. Aptos is a large layer 1 blockchain, move-based blockchain, actually originated within Meta's Libra blockchain program. And so in terms of my background, prior to this role, I worked at a company called T0 in a very similar capacity, where I was head of capital markets and business development. T0 was one of the early entrants within.
好，接下来的这些访谈呢，咱们也不关心了啊。感谢大家的收看啊，非常非常感谢。那么这场会议也是一边开一边跌，我们从直播开始7点25开始。等川普一路下跌，我们看看跌了多少，太他妈狠了，2180点啊，跌了2.5%，这个幅度还是蛮狠的啊。我刚刚去这个刚刚把这个艾达的空单也平掉了啊，等它涨上来，咱们再继续做空啊。那这一波收益还是蛮大的啊，4%的一个收益。好，非常非常感谢大家啊，给大家分析一下是吧？其实也没啥啊，这个今天我今天这个大会啊，这个什么 digital， 这个叫什么 digital asset summit， 我之前都没有听过。那我的理解呢，就是这一个大会呢，就是一个怎么讲呢？他邀请了很多人，对吧？主要呢还是你看啊，我昨天看了一下，他的票还挺贵的啊，就是普通的票都要卖1800块钱。神经病啊！这个比特币大会我买的才100多美金，对吧？那现在它可能涨价了，涨到400多。你再怎么地，你能比得上比特币大会吗？这种会呢，就是圈钱的啊。他为了吸引大家的注意，他今天把这个老川给叫上来了，然后也把 Michael Saylor 其实是很容易拉的，你只要有会他就去参加。 他的目的很明显，他就是为了比特币，为了他自己的这个这个上市公司，为了比特币，所以说。这哥们儿很容易请啊，谁都能请到他。我们看到很多华语的这个主播也能请到他。那回头可能我联系他，他也能上我的频道。就是他很容易啊，很容易请到。川普呢就是临时啊，昨天咱们在这个直播完这个美联储的会议之后啊，是请的他，就是录了一段视频，我估计也是塞钱了啊，可能就塞个几百万，川普就录了一段小视频，其实啥也没讲啊，说实在话，川普上来啥也没讲啊，就是来打酱油的，就是拿人钱了吧，拿人钱了，然后你最起码要露个脸儿。其实他这个可能钱也是送的不到位，送到位的话，川普是直接出现在现场的，就像2024年的比特币大会上，川普是直接出现在现场的。好，那我们看看这一波又开始往下砸了啊！刚刚说我还平掉了，现在是可能又继续往下砸了。我这一波砸的太猛了啊！我们看一下4个小时的线啊，4个小时，还行，4个小时看的话还算是健康的一个调整吧。4个小时线没有这个结构还没有破掉，结构没有破掉啊。那我们看一下日线图，日线图咱们之前跟大家讲过，有可能会走一个3推是吧？1推2推，但是3推到这个地方它停下来了，停下来之后那就没有3推了，对吧？那比特币我们看一下这个 RSI 有没有超买超卖的一个状况出现啊？日线图上确实这个地方要形成一个死叉了啊，大家要小心一点。然后呢，我们这里是今天是周3。如果这个地方的死叉是在周5的时候形成，那周末的时候又难过了。所以说这2天呢还是要小心一点。做多的啊，做多的要小心一点啊。那我们看一下这个小级别的图有没有出现？哎，小级别5分钟图应该是有一个超卖，还没有出现超卖啊，没有出现超卖。但是这个下跌还是蛮猛的啊，这一波的下跌还是蛮猛的。另外呢，咱们刚刚不是，咱把这个关了，咱不看这个直播了啊，太垃圾了。然后，哎，我另外一个，今天早上做这个区块链日报直播的时候，跟大家看的这个图啊，今天早上的判断还是蛮准确的啊。虽然没有看这些直播，但是早上的这个判断还是蛮准确的。那我们看啊，要奔着82650的这个位置去了，对吧？82650的这个位置啊，这个地方要小心一点，空单有可能在这个地方瞬间啊，有可能会瞬间插针。我们要观望一下。如果说你要做多的话，在这个地方等吧，好吧，可以在这个地方挂个单，挂个多单了，我觉得。另外呢，也没有什么好讲的了，今天基本上就这样啊，非常非常感谢大家的收看。然后呢，谢谢你终于讲完了，换了一个，好，那这个感谢大家收看啊，大家点赞一波，订阅一下啊，咱们今天的直播就先到这儿了。然后有什么突发的重大的事件，咱们再说直播的事情啊。因为这个时间段本来我是自己就读报纸、喝咖啡的，然后今天就是特别早啊。昨天咱们直播的时间好像比这稍微晚一点，对吧？OK， 好，那感谢大家的收看，大家都东八区，尤其是东八区的啊，都赶紧去睡觉去吧。太晚了对身体不好，对吧？好，那我把直播关了啊。哎，这个直播在哪关？